welcome to the Sugar and Spikes podcast, a podcast for entrepreneurs, side hustlers, and anyone ready to uplevel their career in their own damn way. I'm Des. I'm a life coach for women who get that having it all sometimes means having to balance the good and the bad, the sugar and the spikes, and all the in-between.
And I'm Tammy. I'm a compassionate yet BS-free therapist, and I work with clients to help them build skills to lead kick-ass lives.
Between the two of us, we have 4 master's degrees and thousands of hours helping people develop balance, confidence, and clarity on their terms. So let's get started. All right, welcome to another episode of the Sugar and Spikes podcast. I'm Des. I am a life coach for badass, amazing women, entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, side hustlers, anyone that wants to make more money than a fucking corporate job. I'm a life coach for them.
Yep.
And we have Tammy.
Hi, everybody.
And she is
a therapist.
Yay!
Yay!
I bet you guys all wish that you had a best friend that was a therapist.
It's a blessing and a curse.
It really is. Okay, so today we're coming off of a long week.
We are.
And the thing is we had shit to do today.
Yeah.
A ton of shit to do. Now, would you say that us getting through today was willpower or something else?
That is an amazing question.
Because I know when you came over, I was like, I'm happy to see her because I hadn't seen her in 2 weeks.
I know.
But I was like, oh God, we have to work.
I know. I was like, yay, and boo. Simultaneously.
I know.
I don't know that it's willpower. I'm not really a firm believer in willpower. I don't really think, okay, clearly you have to have some ability to, not be impulsive.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't really know that that's willpower. Willpower is this magical, mystical thing that's if I just had this, then all my dreams would come true.
Yes. I feel like willpower is, for one, there's a negative connotation with it. Although it does make me think of willpower and grace.
Yes.
Okay.
Willpower and grace. Oh, I remember that well.
But, okay, willpower is always brought up around January or, whenever you're trying to change things that you know are going to be difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always it's almost like this built-in thing, well, I don't have enough willpower to do enter goal here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have enough willpower to run my own business. I don't have enough willpower
to show up consistently.
I don't think that's really true.
I feel like it takes, I can't explain it, and I think maybe it's the way society uses the verbiage, but willpower, there's this limited resource thing that's identified with it, because you do hear it so much in the, well, I didn't have the willpower to blah blah blah, and I mean, we don't hear that with words like commitment.
Yeah, that's true.
I wasn't committed. I mean, if you're being really honest with yourself, you may say that, but commitment doesn't run out the way that willpower does.
That's a really good point. I mean, we don't really talk about it. We don't use it the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's almost, I said it a little earlier, but there's almost this mystical quality to willpower. It's almost well, either you have it or you don't.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have it, you're kind of shit out of luck, right? There's nothing you can do about it. But that's not true, because you can cultivate in yourself the ability to pause for a moment. You can develop an ability in yourself to think about ways to stay the course when times are difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And you can slip up at times and not have that mean you don't have willpower, or you're all the way back to square one, or any of the other all or nothing kind of I've totally failed kind of language that we use when we slip up when we're trying to make changes.
Mm-hmm. I think, yeah, I feel like with willpower, it is this inherent, like, all or nothing. Because if you do slip up, then it was, I didn't have the willpower. But I feel like with words like commitment, like, are you committed to building your business and stuff? Well, then when something goes wrong, then you still maintain this, like, commitment.
Yeah, it's like something you can continue to have, whereas
Mm-hmm.
willpower, it's like you've lost it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, why do you think that willpower is so prevalent? Like, I mean, I'll own I just posted like this whole thing on Instagram earlier where it was like you can keep making excuses or you can make it fucking happen. Like I wasn't talking about willpower like verbatim, but I was definitely like it was totally a just fucking do it type of post.
Yeah, well, I think there's something to that, right? Like, yes, you have to get yourself on the path. You have to, at some point, overcome whatever's stopping you.
Mhm.
And that can take some real work.
Mhm.
Like, that's, I know we've talked about it before, but sitting in that kind of contemplation of, am I going to do this? Am I not? Is kind of where people get hung up and kind of stay the longest. And there's
Mhm.
a lot of work to be done there
Yeah.
to kind of resolve, do I want to do it? Do I not? Because it's not a simple choice.
Mhm.
Um, and I just lost my train of thought, being so brilliant.
That's cool. Like I mean, I
I'm brilliant, everybody, in case you didn't know.
I agree. Like I feel like willpower is just, it's so black and white because whenever you go into something saying like I'm going to do this and then you rely on willpower, like I feel like I'm just repeating myself, but it has this inherent all or nothing type thing.
Yeah, okay, so this is what I was going to say.
Oh yeah.
Willpower doesn't build in that failure, relapse, regression, going back to what you knew before is part of the change
Mm-hmm.
process. Like, I think with willpower, there's this assumption that changes happen in this straight line
Mm-hmm.
where, like, you started at, I don't have a business, you ended at, like, I had this amazingly successful business, and you going from A to B in
Which is totally how it works, you guys.
totally how it
Yeah,
works.
not
So,
no.
the idea of willpower kind of is built on that.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you think about how change really happens, it changes in dips and valleys, or it changes in a spiral, or in a curve, or just not in a straight line.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about that, then you can think about failures or slip ups, relapses, whatever you want to call them, as an opportunity to learn and keep going.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean you failed. It means that what you were doing isn't working. And it's an opportunity to look at what wasn't working and change it and continue to move ahead.
Mm-hmm. I think this is really interesting to me. One of the biggest issues I feel like you can see in the definition of willpower, which is control exerted to do something or restrain impulses. So if you look at control exerted, like we're talking energy, we're talking work, and the thing is like for everything you start, you have to stop at some point.
Yeah.
Like we know this with everything else in our lives. Like you cannot run at 110% the entire time.
Yeah, that's just not possible.
You
We're humans, no matter how much you wish otherwise.
Yeah, like if you go all day without eating because you're so busy, you're probably going to end up eating significantly more like in the evening when you get home or like, things like that. Like I just
Yes, I think it also supposes, I'm going to cut you off just a second
yeah,
before I lose my train of thought, but it also supposes that everything between you and your goal is directly in your control,
which is bullshit.
which is not true.
This kind of goes back to the whole like law of attraction thing. Right? Like if you're seeking control.
Oh, yeah, okay. I was wondering where you were going with that. I'm like, no, it does not.
No,
But
it
does.
goes back
It
to
does.
the whole like you cannot control everything.
Yeah.
Like you can control a hell of a lot, and then there comes a point.
Right. So, like, there are limits to what we can control, no matter how much people think that that's not true. I mean, there are limits. Like, I can't control you.
Mm-mm.
I can't control your thoughts. I can't control your emotions. I can't control your behaviors. I may be able to influence them, but I certainly can't control them.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have a goal, like to build a business, there's so many factors outside of yourself that you're not in control of. You know what I mean? Like things that you couldn't possibly have foreseen, things you can't be responsible for. You know what I mean? Like it's just not a realistic way of looking at things.
So we kind of touched on this, but I want to know your thoughts.
Okay.
What's the reframe? Like, I don't want to just like shit on willpower. Like, it's bullshit. When Tammy brought up this topic to me for the podcast episode, for like an idea, she was like, "I think we should do something on willpower." And my immediate response was, "And how it's bullshit?"
And I think I said, "Is how science isn't really supporting this anymore."
Yeah. Ooh. Okay. Before we get to the reframe,
okay,
talk about the science. Science me.
Oh, science. So there have been some interesting studies that have said that it's really not willpower. It has to do with other factors, like within a person, that determines their ability to delay immediate reward.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
What do we know about people's ability? Like, there was that one study, you can have $20 now or like $100 in a year.
Yeah. So there have been these classic studies with kids where they're like, if you can delay the eating of the marshmallow,
yeah,
you get
that's another one.
5 marshmallows, right? But I kind of think that like this effortful restraint, right? This I'm going to control my impulses is really not the key to a good life.
I think like it puts you at odds with yourself.
Yeah.
Which is my whole thing. Like I talk about on my website, like you may be your biggest enemy. You know, like you may be your own worst enemy. And I think the idea of willpower, it inherently puts you at odds with yourself because you're constantly fighting against what a part of you wants and what another part of you doesn't want.
Right. And it goes to this idea that it's not all or nothing. Like you can want the thing and not want the thing at the same time. I talk about a lot of people that I talk to who are trying to maybe cut down on their use of substances. Like you may really want to use it and may really not want to use it at the same time. And it's really not that. So what's the difference between the person who successfully cuts down or decides to be abstinent between the person who doesn't? It's like this idea for a long time that people were thinking that the people who were successful were good at inhibiting their impulses and that they have a lot of willpower, quote unquote, and that they know how to use it. And that the people who were not successful, they were bad at resisting temptation and that they didn't have sufficient, like we see it as a personal weakness, right? So they had insufficient willpower and we kind of tie moral things to this. And then, so we tie morality to this idea of willpower. You're good.
You sound better when you're close.
Oh, you're good if you have willpower. You're bad if you don't. Right? It's really not all or nothing. So I just find that really interesting. That it's tied to this moral failure. If I eat the cookie, if I don't build the business, if I use more alcohol than I wanted, that somehow I am morally bad.
Well, it's not strengths-based, right?
Right.
Whenever you set off to do something under the frame of willpower, then suddenly when there's a lapse, you find yourself lacking. I didn't have the,
enter judgment here.
Well, like I didn't have the willpower to blah.
Right.
And then suddenly you feel really shitty that you didn't keep up this one thing that you were trying to keep up or whatever, or you didn't like restrain from something, and you're lacking because you didn't have the strength to do it. You know, like it's not a double-edged sword. It's a double strength I don't know,
It's
awful pill.
It's awful.
Yeah.
It's like damned if you do, damned if you don't. It's like the worst double bind ever.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think, like, one thing is, like, when you're working on changing habits and stuff, so much of it comes down to something that you probably don't even know it comes down to. Like, there's a deeper piece behind it. Like, well, I'm not gonna eat sweets. But then you find yourself, like, at the end of the day, like, wanting something really sweet. But is it because you're used to, like, coming home and, like, having something like that? Or is it because you're stressed out? Like,
Is there a strong emotion? Like
yeah.
a comforting feeling tied to sweets? Was that something you were raised with? Like when you were really anxious or nervous, your parent would give you a treat to help you feel better.
Yeah, so, like, what are you seeking in that? Like, I know I've been experimenting with, like, semi-dry January, which is funny in and of itself because God help me if I commit to doing anything for 30 days. But, like, I realized that even working from home and stuff, like, at 5 o'clock, I'm so ready for the routine of, like, a glass of wine or a martini, but it's the routine around it. It's getting something to symbolize my workday is done. This is a time to relax, things like that. So how do I sub that out?
So the behavior has more meaning for you. Yeah. I mean, we don't really realize how many things are tied to the one behavior and how many things in our environment cue us to do it. Right? So, like, the clock telling you it's 5 o'clock cues you to have that drink. The end of your workday, not having any more meetings, cues you to have that drink. The weather outside, the sun in the sky, how high it is, the light coming in from the windows, cues you to have that.
Right.
So it's not just you not being strong enough. The environment is acting on you in ways you're not aware of.
Yeah, like, whenever you're tested to use your willpower and stuff, you're in a situation where all you know is to do that one thing or to not do that one thing. You know, like, you're acting against something that you want. So you're acting against yourself and you're acting against the situation and environment. That's a really, like, just thinking about that, that's such a hard fight.
I don't think the odds are really in your favor.
No.
I mean, it's terrible. And, you know, if you kind of get rid of the idea or kind of push aside the idea of willpower, then we can kind of better understand or kind of examine what work we really need to do and what it really takes to accomplish our goals. Right?
Because, like, one thing I want to be super clear, we're not saying people can't change and
no, I'm saying people can change.
Don't try to better yourself, but
I'm gonna just chime in here. People can change. Yes. I absolutely believe that, or I wouldn't be a therapist.
I wouldn't do what I do.
I know.
This podcast wouldn't exist.
If I really thought people couldn't change, I'm really in the wrong field, and I have just wasted my life. People can change. I think their expectations about how it happens sets them up for failure.
Yes.
I think it does.
Oh, that's so good.
I'm here all week.
She really is.
I really am. So I think if you can be more realistic, if you can problem solve for barriers, if you can problem solve for triggers, if you can recognize that failure is a part of change, then you can be more realistic about how it happens. And then when you do fail, you have a life coach or therapist, because that's what I do, to say, you know what, I believe in you.
Well, and to help you learn something, because in some situations it can be really soul crushing. Like, I think of
absolutely,
like, the willpower to show up every day as you're developing a business, like as a new entrepreneur and stuff. If you're not getting the clicks, if you're not getting the response from people that you want, like, or like you launch something and it was your baby and you were so thrilled to launch it and then and it doesn't happen. Like, it could be framed up as like having the willpower to keep going. And if you don't have someone to help show you all of the other things that you learned, then I don't know, it's not a great situation.
Absolutely. Like, I don't mean to say that a therapist or a life coach is your cheerleader, not at all, but they're also there with that sense of like compassion and lack of judgment and perspective that is so important, that can help us keep going in the face
Mm-hmm.
of failure, because change is hard because failure is built in,
Mm-hmm.
right? If failure wasn't built in, change would be easy.
Yeah.
But it's because we fail over and over and over in attempting to make changes in our lives that becomes defeating, and we give up. And so you have to have someone there in your corner to say, what did you learn from it? Yeah, it's really hard to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think you can? Is it time for a break? How will you know if it's time for a break, and when will you know it's time to start up again?
Mm-hmm.
So to process and examine and think about questions that you haven't considered.
Yeah. I have one question. I don't know if you've seen it online, but I've seen it many times online.
Yeah.
What would you say to the people that say fuck realistic and go for like what you want?
So go for what you want.
Like yes.
Yes, and
Yes. Yes and.
yes, and what are the small term realistic goals
Mhm.
that will get you to the long term goal? Like,
But
shoot for the stars, do it.
But
Like,
there are people, like, there are fucking money coaches out there that say you can ask the universe for anything you want. Like $1 and $1,000,000 are the same to the universe.
okay, but I've asked the universe for $1 million before. And I didn't get it. How come? Because I didn't have short term workable steps to make it happen.
And I know some people out there are probably like, what about being an energetic match and shit? You can't go from 0 to 100. Like, it's like driving a car.
So I feel like we're getting into more law of attraction type stuff that
Oh,
we have talked about before.
Fair.
And
I'm
you
sorry.
know that I have limitations to where I can get on board with that.
Yeah.
Because, like I said earlier, and you agreed with me,
Mhm.
there are things that we can't control. If we could control everything, we would have everything in life that we wanted.
Oh, no, I'm not talking, like, against your point. I'm just...
No,
I can
I'm
hear-
just being passionate about it.
I can hear, like, some people in the background being like, this is bullshit because blah, blah. And the thing is like,
Okay, but
it's
then,
yes and.
yes, and, right? And then maybe our point of view just doesn't jive with yours,
Yeah.
and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is there's so much in the world and so much in the universe that we don't control.
Yeah.
Because if we controlled everything, if you really think about it, we would have everything we want.
Mm-hmm.
Everything.
Yeah.
Because I would just have to think about it hard enough, or wish for it enough, or have enough willpower enough.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just us. Like,
Yeah.
it's such an egocentric way to think about things too. Like, oh, I'm in control of everything that happens to me. Like, okay, you might want to calm that down for just a minute. But we've talked about that before.
You're in control of your responses. It's a spoiler.
You are.
If you don't want to go listen to that podcast, that's what it boils down to.
Which one was it?
The law of attraction.
The law of attraction one.
Yeah.
So we talked about this. I firmly believe you can do things to try and influence others, to try and influence things that are not directly within your control. But there's limitations to influence.
Mm-hmm.
Like, control and influence are different things.
Yeah.
And I think just trying to set people up to say they control everything and they could have it if they just tried hard enough.
If you have enough willpower.
Yeah. Just sets people up for failure.
Mm-hmm.
It's just this horrible cultural message that just traumatizes people.
Yeah.
And, like, shatters them to their core.
Well, I don't contend on that note.
I'm not a fan.
So let's talk reframes.
Okay. So let's talk reframes, right?
Yes.
So, great. You really want to build your business.
Yeah.
Shoot for the stars. Do it. And with your long-term goal, that's shooting for the stars, what are the simple, concrete things you're going to do in the immediate, I like to work in 60 to 90 days. So what are you going to do in the next 60 to 90 days? And how can we problem solve possible barriers now? Because it's not just going to be like smooth sailing. So I would say the key to achieving things isn't willpower. It's having a good plan and for having a good plan for how you're going to reach your goals, problem solving for possible barriers, and being flexible when things don't go exactly as we expect.
And it goes back to the, like, this or something better. Because even if there is a downturn, or if it goes sideways in a way you weren't expecting, then maybe, like, you come out with that lesson and something. Or like, instead of having the business that you thought you wanted, something happens and you're like, okay, now it's going to be this, and then it's like 10 times better.
Yeah.
You know,
like I think about college. This is kind of off topic, but I promise it connects. I think about college. Like, college or university opens you up to possibilities you didn't know were even a thing. So you've been one-track minded, I'm going to do this. Because you don't know that these other things exist in the world.
Yeah.
So suddenly, as you raise your awareness, you build awareness, you're like, oh, but that thing sounds really cool.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, I didn't even know that was a possibility. And you've been trying to get to your goal. So, like, changing majors.
Yeah.
Right? So you can see it as a failure, or you can see it as, wow, this is an amazing new opportunity I didn't even know existed. And it's painful to let go of this dream that I had.
Yeah.
And this one is really exciting and new, and I want to go down this road.
And I think one thing with that is to, like, stay aware, because, like, I was super stubborn. Like, I always heard this statistic that, like, people change majors 4 or 5 times or something in undergrad. I was like, I'm not going to be that person. I know my path and blah, blah, blah. And the thing is like, you're going to end up where you end up no matter what.
Yeah.
It just may take a little more work, either on your end or the universe's end, to get you there.
And be open to possibility.
Yeah.
And it could mean giving up on things that you've held on to for a really long time. And there's some emotional work to be done there.
Yeah.
And this new thing could be amazing.
Yeah. So pretty much there's emotional work no matter what.
Yep.
Sorry, guys.
It's a thing. That's why therapists and life coaches exist.
Yeah.
We're here to help. We know it's hard.
Yeah.
We know it's difficult.
But I think if you take away the idea of willpower and, you know, view it in another way that feels more positive to you and more strength-based, then you definitely come out, you know, for the better in the long run.
Yeah. So I hope we reframed it in a way where you don't feel like you've somehow morally failed if you didn't make it to a goal. Because it doesn't mean you're bad or shame or any of those things, any of those messages that we just get bombarded with all the time. It just means that some things have happened along the way that have to be dealt with, that have to be problem solved, and it may mean shifting course. It may mean staying the course.
It may mean the course needed a different version of you.
Yeah.
Like,
so many things. But I think it's just opportunities to be amazing and learn things about yourself that you didn't know before.
Yep. All right. Thanks, guys, for listening. Feel free to check us out. I'm at DesireeW.com, and that's where all the Sugar and Spikes podcasts are. Also on iTunes. You can find me on social media, DesW, Ms. MBA. Yeah, talk to you guys later.
Take care, everybody.
That wraps up this episode of the Sugar and Spikes podcast. Thanks so much for listening. We'd also like to thank Forget the Whale for use of their song Move Along as our theme music. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe, share, and let the whole world know how good this shit is by leaving a review. It would mean so, so, so much. Also, don't forget to get your free stress layer training by going to DesireeW.com and clicking on Slay Your Stress. You'll also find a link to that in the show notes below. Till next time, and remember to stay unavailable for fuckery.